Chapter 10. 0810 hours, April 15th, 2539. Military calendar. Metrome system. Planet boundary. Salvation Capitol building. Governor Huxley ran out of the Capitol in a sprint. The news from one of General Grant's sensor operators just hit her compad, and she gathered her things and rushed out at once. She gazed up at the skyline in horror, frozen in fear, as three bulbous-headed Covenant ships of war descended from the heavens. They were sleek and curved, like two teardrops connected at their tails. Even in the hazy morning sun, she could see glowing lateral lines still warmed from their engagement against Task Force Lima. She noted that one was billowing smoke and flame with electric blue static discharge surging across half the length of its prow. It skipped the city entirely and took a direct line from low orbit toward a vector over the Aeron mountain range to the north. Looks like Acasio's plan, or at least the first part of it, had worked as intended. A thunderous crack filled the air as the other vessels continued their descent, their mass parting the clouds like a drop of oil in water. The sonic boom pierced her ears, stunning her. As several glass panes from the nearby promenade shattered, this prompted onlookers pouring out into the streets to exit their cars and shops to see what the hell was happening. The pain in her ears began to fade only to replace ringing for blood-curdling screams. She tried to gain her composure as she stood in the courtyard. Of course, she had seen the destruction wrought by the Covenant from the news over the years, but had never witnessed it herself. She struggled to shake off the paralysis from shock, blinked and calmed her breathing. "Governor?" A faint voice tickled the back of her mind. "Melissa." The disembodied voice grew louder now. She snapped out of her stupor and looked for the person yelling her name. She turned her view from the streets beyond the steps of the Capitol to the interior. There stood a handful of soldiers, one yelling her name through cupped hands. A rifle dangled from a sling on his chest. The others were pointing their weapons toward the sky as if they were expecting something. "We have to get you to the bunker now." She squinted and noticed the patches on their uniforms. It was her newly assembled military entourage that had been yelling commands at her. At the behest of General Grant and her staff, he had gathered several fine young men and women from a platoon garrisoned not far from here and augmented her small security detail. Even though the military was now in control of the city, she was still the leading public figure responsible for the millions of people on Boundary. It was imperative to keep her alive, if anything but to inspire and lead others through this calamity. A sprint across the courtyard found her once again at the top of the Capitol steps. She dared a look back at the sky to see the curved, bulbous twin hulls of each battlecruiser descend through the darkening clouds. Astonishingly fast. They settled to hover several hundred meters over the city center and began projecting a faint purple gravity lift. It emanated from a large circular pad situated in the center and dorsal side. A massive hatch began to iris open. Then, like a swarm of gnats, she could see a fleet of fighter craft explode out and away. The swarm of gnats began to grow larger and into focus. They were cruciform in shape with a deep purple finish, sporting two large turrets on the front canopy of the fighters. Banshees. This was a term she had picked up on from her endless briefings over the last few days. She had been appraised on all manner of things, from Covenant tactics to weapons and vehicle capabilities, courtesy of some staffers and military aides in the CIC, as well as open-source intelligence garnered from Harvest Moon and General Grant's cadre. The atmosphere of the city changed immediately with the onset of panic, and the Covenant craft filling the airspace. The contrast was morbidly beautiful, with the dark backdrop of the cloud-covered city, now illuminated with the blue and green projectiles comprised of superheated plasma and discharged fuel rod cannons. She turned her back to the chaos and hurried toward the double doors she had left from. At once, the militia cadre formed a diamond around her. MA-5K bullpup assault rifles shouldered at the ready and shuffled her toward the elevator. "Give me some room, please," she said to her escort. They were already suffocating her, and this was the last thing she wanted. Right now, she wanted to get in touch with the various UNSC forces positioned in key locations around the city to see how they were faring so far. It wouldn't be long, she knew. before the casualty and damage reports started rolling through the encrypted channels she was monitoring. The soldiers, all four looking no older than her young assistant, shuffled toward the edges of the elevator as they began to descend. She raised General Grant. "Michael, anything to report that I haven't seen with my own eyes yet?" "Ma'am, the USNC officers I'm with state this is a pretty common tactic. Break through any orbital defense, establish air dominance, and begin landing troops. They don't know why their ships haven't started the glassing yet. But for now, let's not question it," he replied. "I'll see you in the bunker, Grant out." The comm channel snapped off. Then she tried raising Bernard Ocasio, still busy supervising the evacuation efforts. Yesterday, they had both finalized the positioning of all available craft on the far east side of the continent, while beginning to escort civilian craft across the thousands of miles of agricultural centers outside of Sanctuary. There was a wash of static as she raised him, electrical interference from the events outside to be sure. There would be Banshee and their larger counterparts, Seraphs, in low orbit, targeting communication satellites to be certain. "Huxley," she made out faintly with a hiss of static. She winced as her earpiece squelched sharply but forced herself to keep a finger pressed down on the earbud to listen. 49 transports filled with supplies and precious cargo," he said, referring to the first round of citizens. "We hit a few snags, but Harvest has done a solid job of getting the craft from point A to point B. One problem, though." "Well, don't leave me in suspense, Bernard. What is it?" the governor demanded. "Even with those Covenant ships over Salvation, I'm afraid there's other craft in the system that we don't know about." From what she understood, the Covenant were rarely seen alone or even in pairs. When one was attached, they were attacked with overwhelming force. He was clearly hesitant to let the ship captains take off blindly into an ambush. "I'll try and raise Captain Fulton to see if the departure lanes are clear," she responded. "Sit tight and keep getting the rest of the vessels ready for emergency slipspace jump as soon as they get clear of the planet." Although her knowledge of naval vessels and slipspace was limited to layman's terms, she, just like anyone else, knew the dangers of attempting a transition into slipspace from within the confines of a planet's atmosphere. In the budding days of slipspace travel, humanity had quickly discovered that when there were particles surrounding the tear in three-dimensional space, the resulting collision between antimatter and physical matter led to strange effects. Most common, however, was that the vessel simply exploded. The familiar doors slid open before her, and the group filed out into the dimly lit corridors leading to the command and control center. She reached her seat at the far end of the room and began studying the monitors. Feeds of tactical data, radio traffic, satellite imagery, and the real-time position of each Covenant and human ship filled all corners. Around her was a flurry of activity now, not that it hadn't been there before. Bradley King was speaking with someone about ditching those damn machines and getting the hell out of there, talking about the fleet of extremely expensive and autonomous farming equipment across the plains of the Southern Hemisphere. To her right, and halfway down a flight of steps to a separate platform, and a separate suite of displays and computer servers, was Mallory Johnson, hard at work. It looked like she was updating maps to provide real-time data to the troops on the ground. Sitting perpendicular to her was a young soldier from General Grant's forces to relay information and assist the director. She squeezed by a pair of guards and took a look at the main display which dominated the room, floor to ceiling, with an endless supply of varying information. She squinted to examine each data point until her eyes landed on what she was most curious about: what the damaged Covenant ship was doing and where it was headed. After several minutes of viewing the apocalyptic start of the battle on the central display, another blip of information caught her eye. It seemed almost like fireworks going off in the city's central park, known to the denizens simply as Aron Square, so duly named after the ancient Celtic god of agriculture, a patron of good fortune for their efforts on this far-flung world, once noted as inhospitable to many before their terraforming campaign. She took a step forward, placed 2 fingers on the display and splayed them out to expand the view. A firefight had broken out between a platoon of militia soldiers, supplemented by UNSC Marines, Warthogs, and even a Scorpion tank. Many species of Covenant were landing in droves near the park and scrambling for cover wherever they could to try and gain a foothold. While the littler aliens called grunts moved forward in suicidal wave after suicidal wave, they were hosed down by withering human gunfire. The fireworks she had noticed a moment before were actually civilian vehicles exploding. Civilian cars, UNSC vehicles, and now Covenant gun carriages were erupting in yellow balls of fire as the battle thickened. A sonic boom permeated the sky around Arthur Teal Team, and a mixed detachment of volunteers and militia fighters. The small complement of soldiers and civilians turned to look at the brilliant display of colors toward the city center. He stood up from a map study and noticed a battlecruiser venting atmosphere and careening toward the far side of the mountain range directly to the north of their position. A point of interest, perhaps, later on. Right now, it was 0 hour. He raised the team on his suit's internal communications channel. Teal Force, showtime. He had a dedicated encrypted channel for his team and the ODSTs with him. To assist with updates in orbit and in the air, Arates was given access as well. Never hurt to have a smart AI in your corner. He wanted to take advantage of the fleet's presence overhead for as long as they remained available. Acknowledgements popped into his helmet from each team leader, along with 3 green LED lights in the top left of his HUD, each light belonging to Solomon, Sheila, and Cal. Cal, grab a spotter and start heading up to the mountain range. I want eyes on that downed Covenant battlecruiser. He scanned the horizon on the southern perimeter of the hastily fortified camp they'd set up the day prior. He couldn't see the Spartan but knew she was posted precisely 687 meters away in a hide she had constructed several hours ago. She was the team's designated marksman and a crack shot. On more than one occasion, she had managed to beat Linda 058 on the range to everyone's astonishment, showing just how lethal she truly was. Arthur couldn't think of anyone better for the job. He started moving toward a nearby M12 light reconnaissance vehicle, or Warthog for short. Solomon, Sheila, with me. While he waited for his teammates to regroup on his position, he slid the MA-5B assault rifle off the magnetic mount on the miniaturized fusion pack from the rear of his armor. During boot, Chief Petty Officer Mendez had beat into their heads over and again about several principles he would never forget. Machines fail. Eyes don't. Take every effort to visually inspect your gear and check your target. He pulled the charging handle to the rear and peered into the chamber to inspect for any dirt or obstructions. Satisfied with the state of his weapon and finishing a quick function check, he saw Cal's friend of foe tag popped up in the darkening sky overhead. Wasting no time, she had tagged her spotter, Sergeant Davis, and was now on the way to the mountain range. Standing orders from the Office of Naval Intelligence's Section 3 was to capture any Covenant technology for the eggheads back in the safety of secret naval bases. He wanted eyes on the downed ship. If they could capture a battlecruiser, damaged or not, it would be worth its weight in the blood and sweat shed to take it. Solomon and Sheila jogged up the nearby vehicle and took their pre-designated positions. Arthur grabbed the roll bar above the passenger side frame of the Warthog with Solomon behind the wheel, and Sheila on the M41 Vulcan anti-aircraft gun, situated in the truck bed on a rotating turret mount. The vehicle roared to life, Solomon slamming his foot down on the accelerator in his usual over-the-top fashion. He was always one for the theatrics, but Arthur let it slide. He knew Solomon meant well and had a knack for lightening the mood during stressful missions. Sierra 079, this is General Grant, over. The frequency displayed on Arthur's helmet as the secondary command channel. The primary was reserved strictly for Captain Fulton and Aretes to Teal Force. Go ahead, General, he responded as the helmet's audio filter began to muffle the roaring of the Warthog's engine tearing into the soft ground, kicking up muddy globules that splashed onto his suit. You've probably figured this out by now, but the Covenant are about to make a landfall. Looks like a few wings of Seraphs and Banshees are breaking out from their mothership to start harassing our ground forces. Acknowledged, General. Teal Team en route to provide assistance, ETA 7 minutes. He and Lieutenant Green had decided to tailor their primary objectives around the assumption that the Covenant would land ground forces and raise the city. So while Teal Team oversaw the preparations of hard points around the city's perimeter, to funnel foot soldiers and vehicles into kill zones. The rest of Teal Force funneled resources into concealed and fortified positions of superior altitude toward the center of the city. They would use the tight street and alleyways to their advantage, choking off advancing troops from reinforcements and preventing friendly forces from becoming overwhelmed too quickly. Lieutenant Green. Arthur had not heard from the ODST platoon leader since the Covenant broke through the atmosphere. "Go for Teal 5, the lieutenant said. Teal 1 was reserved for Arthur. "How's it looking up there in your penthouse, sir?" He heard a chuckle over the mic that was quickly drowned out by the familiar staccato of automatic gunfire. "Oh, just peachy on my end. Johnson, get that spanker trained on the—" Static hissed into the receiver. That wasn't good. Lieutenant Green and his ODSTs were in charge of handling their stockpile of air-to-ground missiles, C-12-shaped explosives, and most importantly, the Octa. Octanitrocubane, or as it was called by most as Octa, was the nickname given by UNSC forces for the highly explosive, extremely costly tubs of shaped charges preferred for high-impact results without the dangers of radiation. With almost the same weight to yield as a low-grade tactical nuclear device, Octa was portable, lightweight, didn't emit radiation, and didn't lose its yield in a vacuum environment. Solomon. Arthur turned to his driver. "Double time. Sounds like Teal 5 needs a hand already." The Warthog began to take evasive maneuvers around the various quickcrete roadblocks set up in the major arteries of the city. On more than one occasion, Solomon had to evade packs of terrified civilians fleeing on foot or bicycles or anything they could get their hands on. Arthur began setting waypoints for his team utilizing the topographic map overlay on his HUD. Courtesy of the Nefaris's complement of reconnaissance tech, Teal Team had unfettered access to a network of satellite feeds and spy drones from the task force, situated in low orbit directly over the city. He selected a burned-out building, what looked to be a bank, and pinged Solomon. He looked over to his driver, who took one hand off the wheel and sent a thumbs up his direction. The bank had several advantages, first being the naturally fortified nature of the location. Thick steel plated the entry doors, and the entirety of the building was made of a concrete polymer, which was naturally resistant to explosion and could take extreme heat for a limited period. Anything short of a plasma mortar would keep them safe. He would have Solomon take a defensive posture there to discourage any aircraft from harassing the ground forces below. Next, Arthur brought up the subterranean overlay of the city. Yesterday, Sheila finished outlining the strategy of evacuating citizens in the tunnels below the city, while the militia reinforced or collapsed key locations of the tunnel network. It was time to test her security plan. To supplement the sappers sabotaging and preparing the subterranean network, Sheila and a team of EOD techs had been hard at work placing their own surprises. C-12 charges, thermite carbon cord, proximity mines, and so many more guerrilla tactics now lie in wait, ready to be sprung. "Sheila, go," Arthur said and pointed two fingers toward the manhole cover adjacent to the bank. The plan was for her to play cat and mouse while Arthur and the ODSTs conducted a feint to draw the enemy troops out into the open. The Spartan hopped off the gun, picked up an extra satchel of ammunition and explosives, and started sprinting toward the manhole cover. Arthur switched positions in the Warthog to take up the driver's seat and threw the vehicle into gear. The tires spun in place as the treads found their purchase and took off once more. Farther down the highway, he could see several squads of grunts, jackals, and elite officers picking their way through a graveyard of civilians. "Sierra 079 to Teal 5, sitrep." Arthur tried raising Lieutenant Green on Team Comm again, only to receive a garbled, unintelligible response. He paused and pulled over to take up a defensive position, situating himself between the Warthog and a massive tree overgrowing the sidewalk. Arthur took the rifle off his back and racked the charging handle, then laid it on the hood of the vehicle. The channel crackled again, then cleared. Bastards are setting up mobile cover, those energy barriers, with waves of suicidal grunts screening their advance. We're being suppressed by jackal snipers and elites with carbines. I sent a fire team to swing left around the park to take some pressure off, but I can't raise them. "Understood, sir. We'll take care of it," Arthur said. He hailed Solomon. "Solomon, need you to send a pair of M19s toward the park. Target the elite officers." While waiting for the green LED acknowledgement light to flash on his display, he raised their rapid. Teal 3. "Are you in position yet?" he asked Sheila. "Almost," she chaffed as she sprinted through the sewer system. "Set. Patching visual to you now." A heartbeat later, and a black square filled the periphery of his helmet, then sparkled to life as a manhole cover was raised, revealing a grainy image of troops pouring green and blue streaks of plasma and carbine rounds toward a massive building. The fiber optic cable twitched and shifted to the left. Across the intersection, a cafe was being assaulted. Civilians trying still to run and were cut down. Glass shattered into millions of shards. A clutch of grunts charging into the storefront to set up a tripod and plasma turret. The position had a perfect enfilade fire to cut off reinforcements to the ODST position. The move was sound but effective. Arthur needed to relieve some pressure on Lieutenant Green's base of fire so they could conduct a tactical withdrawal into their secondary firing positions. He couldn't do that with the troops pouring effective fire at their building. He had seen enough from the feed and jumped back into the Warthog. He increased speed to catch up down the broken boulevard toward the south side of the park. Solomon and Sheila were preparing to conduct their hasty ambush to cut off the advance through the intersection. "Sir, ETA to southern entrance to the park, 15 seconds, the Spartan reported. "Be prepared to execute pincer on my mark. Teal 2. Without slowing down, Arthur pulled his Sabaton off the accelerator, tensed the muscles in his legs, and flung his full weight through the air. He rolled into a sprint while removing the MA-5B slung on his back. With no hesitation, he shouldered the rifle and began rattling off 3-round bursts. There was no time to slow down or risk losing the element of surprise. 3 grunts and a pair of angry-looking jackals crumpled and fell. He took cover behind a nearby utility truck and pressed the magazine release. He peeked around the corner to assess the situation while slamming a fresh magazine into the receiver. The ammunition counter read 60. "Solomon, Sheila now," Arthur directed his team. A moment later, 2 M19 rockets streaked through the air, one striking the bulbous canard of a Banshee fighter craft, while the other zipped past its wingman to score a glancing hit on a Phantom dropship. It's enough destruction to scare off the formidable troop transport long enough to clear the skies for Lieutenant Green. "ODST's on the move," the beleaguered platoon commander reported. They had attached quick grapples to the sides of the rooftops they had taken residence in. Arthur glanced up at the sky, his faceplate adjusting to the westward skyline. He saw several black dots falling in gentle arcs, pushing off from the building and falling, pushing off the building and falling, until they reached the ground and toward their secondary positions. Arthur exited the covered position and took to scan the park for additional threats and to locate their missing fire team. A red LED glanced in his faceplate, then an amber burst. Then finally, a green LED flashed 3 times in rapid succession, signaling Sheila's part of the plan was underway. Instantly, the north side of the park erupted in a fireball, purple static discharge emanating from Ghost and Wraith tanks. Arthur advanced through the large doors of the park and noticed his armor getting pinged by an unidentified FOF tag. He advanced toward the position, readying both his combat knife and grenade, hoping to retain a stealthy advance and get the jump on anything past the grove of trees ahead. He sprinted from cover to cover, conducted a roll and splayed himself out on the ground, deciding to crawl the rest of the way up the rise before him. The Spartan reached the precipice of the hill and squinted, activating his visor's magnification. Approximately 150 meters away, he saw 2 Marines. The first was rendering first aid on the fallen soldier writhing on the ground in front of him. He applied biofoam to a chest wound as she shouted something indiscernible to her comrade. The other Marine was providing covering fire, albeit a useless gesture. Farther past their position was a hastily assembled barricade made of debris from human and Covenant ground vehicles. A hail of needles and shaped plasma streaked past their heads. "Sir, found your missing troopers, moving into position now," Arthur snapped on his comm as he moved into position. Teal 2, 3, rendezvous with Teal Force and exfil through Route B3. B, in this instance, designated the subterranean route, and 3 designated the tertiary route. Primary and secondary avenues were now filled with fresh reinforcements, an alley to the south and a riverbed to the east that led straight to the base of the battleship's gravity lift. He stood up and slid the combat knife back into its sheath, then shouldered his rifle once again. "Friendly coming in," the Spartan shouted, charging in behind the 2 Marines still fit to fight. They paid him little mind as one Marine lay in a pool of his own blood, still being attended to by his friend. The other was caught by an errant plasma bolt as he stood up to return fire. "Marine!" he shouted and fired the assault rifle over the barricade. "I've got the casualty. Fall back to this building." He pointed a finger with his free hand, then scooped up the fallen soldier, lying in a pool of blood. He had a nasty chest wound with flaking cinders of carbon-scorched chest armor falling from a ragged tear near the collar. "Wondering when someone would get us out of this shitty situation," one scoffed. The burly Marine slapped the shoulder of his last squad mate and shouted, "Pearson, he's gone!" He snatched the fallen trooper's ID tags from his neck, and Arthur set them on the way to their fallback position. The Spartan continued to fire down the boulevard until the pair of Marines signaled they were set to cover his own withdrawal. Several minutes and magazines of 7.62 ammunition later, his onboard computer chimed as someone attempted to raise him on comms. With hostiles still in sight, the suit system waited to display additional information and filtered the tactical information to only the essentials until he was out of danger. He selected a fragmentation grenade from his belt, slid a thumb over the priming stripe, and threw the explosive as far as he could down the street. If he was right, the Covenant forces would see the grenade sail over their heads and take cover long enough for Arthur to move the casualty slumped over his shoulder, and to double-time it back to the Warthog he stashed a block away. Teal 3, link up complete with Teal 5, Sheila reported on Team Comm as Arthur packed the casualty onto the Warthog's rear bed. The pair of Marines took their place, one behind the turret and one settled into the passenger seat. She scanned the street beyond while her partner rotated the barrel toward the skies, traversing back and forth in an arc. "Acknowledged, Teal 3, Arthur responded, moving now toward the pre-designated rendezvous point just outside the eastern part of Salvation. "Teal 2 status?" the Spartan commander inquired. Solomon should have already displaced from his position in the bank once it was confirmed that the ODSTs had dropped from the rooftops. "Teal 2 moving to position, sure could use a ride, team leader." Arthur could see his squad mate emerging from a ruined building, cleaning the knife of iridescent green alien fluids, and sheathed the weapon on his belt. Arthur fishtailed the vehicle into a defensive position and moved a finger from one building to the next in a sweeping motion, signaling his turret gunner to watch the rooftops. Solomon unslung his own rifle and jumped into the Warthog next to the casualty lying in rest now behind Arthur's seat. The collection of Spartans and ODSTs continued their exfil unopposed throughout the east side of town. No sooner had Arthur begun to raise Captain Fulton for orders than Teal 4, Cal, raised him on Team Comm. "Sir, got some interesting activity on the far side of the Iran ridgeline." She must have found where the damaged ship touched down. That meant she had eyes on the target. "Go ahead, Teal 4, he responded, continuing to swerve through the derelict streets and abandoned vehicles. "First ship definitely crippled. Looks like that Ocasio guy's plan wasn't so crazy after all," she said in a hushed tone. Although their helmets had integrated sound-dampening filters, one could never be too safe. There was no way to tell who might be listening. Even Cal wasn't perfect. "A second cruiser just descended. Looks like it approached from the north, not the south like the other one." "Get to the point, Teal 4, Arthur said. There wasn't time for speculation. "It seems like there's a dispute between two of the elites, patching the feed to your HUD." Arthur was multitasking, keeping two hands on the wheel, swerving around vehicles and viewing the video feed coming from Cal's helmet. To him, it seemed like two unusually large elite warriors were standing off in some sort of ritualistic martial arts pose, as if they were about to kill each other or put on a show. The first alien shed his outer cloak to reveal a patchwork of fresh bruises and bloody spots on his body. More interesting, however, was the plasma sword he reached for. A large crowd of mainly grunts and jackals formed around the two. The bloodied elite activated its sword with a flourish and charged the other. The elite's opposite did the same, but had no tunic to shed. He had a complete combat harness on and matched his opponent with energy blade in hand. The two began to circle each other as the crowd of onlookers grew in size. The gravity beams of each ship were flooded with new troops and began to overcrowd the landing pads below. Whatever is going on, I think we can capitalize on it. Cal broke the silence. I propose we enter with a few Hornets into the damaged sections of the hull and commandeer it. Arthur considered his options, weighing the defense of the city against the potential of a captured Covenant battlecruiser. At the very least, they would increase their chances of winning this fight with one less ship in play. He needed to run this past Captain Fulton before he was forced to jump out system on his first attack run. Arthur knew if the Covenant ship on the other side of this mountain range was already critically damaged, then Captain Fulton would engage with any remaining craft in orbit or already destroyed it himself. He decided to raise the task force commander, but received only silence in return. After several more attempts at establishing a secure connection, he changed tactics. If the commander was incapacitated or no longer capable of operational command of this mission, then Arthur had tactical command of all operations groundside. This included the execution of an assault on the Covenant cruiser. He raised General Grant in lieu of Captain Fulton and apprised him of the situation. This was a courtesy to their local forces. Arthur's philosophy was that of asking for forgiveness is quicker than asking for permission. Spartans were trained from day one to always take the initiative in a fight, and to leverage whatever advantages they could take. Sheila grabbed the Pelican and rendezvous at this waypoint in 30 minutes. We're going hunting. He glanced up from his position and located a sight toward the edge of town as a faint yellow waypoint displayed itself. Information began to display. Vector, distance, and other pertinent information gathered from the satellite network above. Solomon, stick with the LT. I have a feeling they're going to need all the help they can get. Yes, sir, Teal 2 responded. Solomon had always been quick on his feet and even quicker with a team. He was as rock-solid as he came, which was why Arthur chose him to hang back with the ODSTS. A platoon of Helljumpers and a Spartan were a powder keg ready to be lit for any Covenant forces daring to face them. Cal, we'll be there soon. Keep a low profile, Teal 1 out. A single green light winked in the periphery of his HUD, and the channel went silent.